What I hoped and what I think I can see happening is a couple of different things start happening to managers when they start thinking that their goal is to create public value. And the first is to stretch their imagination out from the ongoing operations and the procedures they're currently following and stuff like that to the important question of, well, what results are we getting and why would anybody think those were valuable? All right, so the first thing that happens is sort of moving people's imagination from the management of processes to the achievement of results. And in the public sector, that usually carries you through not only a series of transactions with individual citizens, but also trying to visualize how those transactions with citizens accumulate to a change in aggregate social conditions or the achievement of social outcomes. So the first is that I think it carries you more in the direction of goals as well as or ends rather than means, and goals rather than processes for producing those goals. That's number one. Number two, I think by introducing the concept of value, you manage to bring into the conversation both a narrow definition of value, which is concrete changes that happened in people's lives that they judge to be valuable, all right? But also a larger idea of value, which is to what extent did the outcome we achieve, to what extent was that consistent with not only an idea of a good society, but also of a just society. So another important part of the idea of public value was to try to create room in people's minds, not only for the individual effects and not only for the social effects, but to weigh those in terms of whether they were good for people, but also whether people were treated fairly and whether the actions were leading to a more just, as well as a more prosperous society. So first is ends rather than means. Second is a larger philosophical framework in which to imagine and evaluate the results that are taking place. The third, I think, would be to realize that the areas in which you might be able to contribute as the leader of an organization might be larger than what you're currently doing or the way you currently understand your mission. If the world is changing around you rapidly, and if there are lots of problems that cut across institutions and can only be solved by collaboration across institutions, government managers can't afford to be too much attracted to a narrow definition of their mission. They might have to hold their mission a little bit more contingently and imagine that there were some things they could do beyond their mission that would be valuable, either because they had the capacity to do it and nobody else seemed to be doing it, or because they were needed in a collaboration with other organizations, and in order to do that collaboration successfully, they had to depart a little bit from their own mission. So ends, not means, broader set of values, getting a little bit out from under the exacting requirements of a mission that was established a long time ago and gotten hardened into the particular way you were doing things. And that leads to the next thing, which is that as soon as the scope of your interest gets broadened in all of these ways, the opportunity to imagine innovations that would make a difference turns out to be very important. And so there's an invitation then for you to think about how things could be improved. And that wouldn't be limited to simply process improvements in existing operations. It might be the addition of new outputs or functions in your own organization, or maybe even the reshaping of the mission of your organization. I think it's the challenge might be, starting at the personal level, a recovery of a sense of importance and efficacy and agency. And I think that, we never wanted public managers to think too much of themselves and think that they were too important in managing our public affairs. But I think there's an equally great challenge in having them lose a sense that they count at all, and that nobody's interested in the quality of their expertise or the nature of their commitments to public ideals. And therefore, part of the idea is to recover a sense of purpose and importance among public managers, because that would give them the strength then to continue to use their value-creating imaginations to contribute to the welfare of society, which would be good, all right? Having said that, then I think the next problem is to get comfortable with the fact that they live in an environment that is changing and that's heterogeneous and dynamic. And the heterogeneity and dynamic of their environment consists, on the one hand, on the task that they're trying to take on, which keep changing in their character, and then on the other hand, in the political aspirations that are expressed through the ordinary political processes of a democratic society. And the challenge is to treat the complexity and dynamism on both sides of your environment as an opportunity for you to imagine how you could make a temporary resolution of those things and live with that for a couple of years, rather than to imagine that A, you couldn't do anything at all, or B, that you can do everything. So. Yeah, there are, and obviously the systems in the different there are cultural differences as well as institutional differences, and a lot has to do with sort of the degree to which the societies think of themselves as a collective, and the degree to which the idea of a common purpose or a common cause is acceptable. And I would say, for the most part, that Commonwealth countries and European countries have a more stronger sense of a community and a common purpose than in the United States. And I also think it's true that the Commonwealth and European countries generally hold the state in higher regard than we do in the United States, so that there's more opportunity, I think, for public officials in the Commonwealth and European countries to feel like they can start talking about public value and its production without immediately offending a large number of people than it is in the United States, where the very idea of a public value would be contested relatively quickly.